Did you know that one Black-owned business in Washington, D.C. quietly generated over $500 million in revenue in a single year? That's the kind of Black wealth we're talking as we embark on this jaw-dropping countdown of the richest Black-owned businesses in Washington, D.C. This topic was picked after a poll win from the viewers, so if you want any specific topic covered next, let us know in the comments. Now let's start at the bottom and work our way up to the richest entry on this list. Number 10. Black Digital Group. If you're picturing Black wealth in D.C. as flashy offices or ribbon-cutting ceremonies, Black Digital Group quietly breaks that illusion. Founded around 2018 by a collective of D.C. native Black professionals, Black Digital Group operates squarely in the $5 to $10 million annual revenue range. And here's the interesting part. 55 to 65% of that revenue comes straight from government contracts. In 2024 alone, they landed a $1.2 million D.C. government deal tied to public health and diversity campaigns. That's not social media fluff. That's taxpayer-funded messaging designed to influence real-world behavior. What makes D.C. such fertile ground for a firm like this is the city's procurement ecosystem. Agencies prioritize CBE and MBE certified local firms, and once you're in, you're in. The procurement cycles are long, bureaucratic, and sometimes maddening, but they're predictable. That predictability allows Black Digital Group to plan months ahead, stabilize payroll, and maintain EBITDA margins between 22 to 28%, which is unusually strong for a creative agency. The private side of the business adds another $2 to $3 million annually, mostly through branding, PR, and digital strategy for nonprofits, advocacy organizations, and corporate partners who need cultural fluency, not just clicks. Instead of bloating full-time staff, the company keeps a tight core of 25 full-time employees, then scales each campaign with 100 to 120 Black freelancers, circulating money back into the local creative economy. One of their quiet superpowers is data. Their AI-driven demographic targeting, especially for Black audiences in urban corridors, consistently outperforms generic outreach by 30 to 40%. And then there are the digital power breakfasts. No banners, no panels. Just invite-only rooms where policy staffers, creatives, and nonprofit leaders talk shop before deals ever hit paper. It's influenced by proximity, not posturing. The founders' combined net worth sits around $2 to $5 million, which was entirely bootstrapped. No VC theatrics. Just DC math. But if Black Digital Group controls how messages move through the city, the next business controls something even heavier. Who gets access to the city itself? Number 9. The Peebles Corporation. A lot of the skyline changes people usually associate with modern DC trace back to Don Peebles, a developer who figured out early that visibility, scale, and permanence were non-negotiable if you wanted to matter in this city. The Peebles Corporation generates an estimated $20 to $40 million annually from its DC operations, which represent roughly a quarter of its national portfolio. Across the country, the firm controls over $1 billion in assets under management, with luxury hotels, residential towers, and mixed-use developments in DC, Miami, Las Vegas, and New York. Peebles himself sits at a net worth estimated north of $750 million, making him one of the wealthiest Black real estate developers in the United States. The company's DC roots go back to the 1990s, and that timing matters. Peebles entered the market when capital access for Black developers was still heavily restricted, especially for high-end projects near political power centers. Instead of staying in acceptable development zones, the firm pushed directly into luxury, delivering over 15 DC projects, including Capitol View, a 500-plus unit residential development, and multiple Hilton-branded hotel properties. These weren't symbolic wins. They were proof-of-concept plays that forced lenders and municipalities to recalibrate who they trusted with big budgets. One of the most under-discussed aspects of Peebles' rise is his legal strategy. The firm challenged discriminatory lending practices head-on, winning over $100 million in settlements tied to redlining and financing bias. That money didn't just pad balance sheets. It reset precedent and unlocked future capital flows, not just for Peebles but for other minority developers watching closely. Beyond the balance sheet, the economic impact is hard to ignore. Peebles-led projects have created over 1,000 minority construction and trade jobs in D.C. alone, while contributing to the revitalization of areas like the Southwest waterfront well before it became fashionable. But while urban reshapes skylines, the next business decides where D.C. gathers, eats, and quietly negotiates power over cocktails. Number 8. Kitchen plus Kocktails. Kith and Kin. Kwame. Onwuachi's restaurants look like celebrity success stories on the surface. But underneath the vibe and the Instagram moments, this is a brutally efficient hospitality machine built specifically for Washington, D.C. It's actually the margins, the repetition, and the D.C. clientele that keep the lights on. And trust me, those numbers are serious. Across Kith and Kin and Kitchen plus Kocktails, the operation generates between $15 million to $25 million annually. Each flagship location pulls in over $5 million per year, with catering and private dining adding another $8 to $10 million. A key driver? A 2.2 times nightly seat turnover, which is exceptional for upscale dining, paired with 65 to 70% margins on beverages, the quiet profit engine of hospitality. Kwame's personal net worth sits around $8 million, but the ecosystem he's built employs 150 people, 80% of them BIPOC, many sourced directly from D.C. neighborhoods. In short, payroll alone represents a major economic contribution. And D.C. is the perfect market for this kind of operation. Lobbyist expense accounts, embassy receptions, and corporate offsites create a steady stream of diners who aren't price-sensitive, but they are experience-sensitive. Add Black Restaurant Week, which alone drives $2 million plus in incremental revenue, and you have a city that supports upscale Black-owned dining in a way few others can. His memoir and media appearances didn't just build brand equity, they boosted traffic by 30% year over year, turning personal narrative into measurable ROI. That's cultural capital being monetized properly. But the deeper play here is soft power. These restaurants are meeting grounds. Deals happen at the bar. Relationships form over plates that blend Afro-Caribbean, Nigerian, and Southern influences without apology. It's cuisine as a conversation starter. Looking ahead, the expansion path is clear. D.C. to Philly to NYC, exporting a distinctly Black, upscale hospitality model that travels well because it's rooted in story instead of trends. So we can say restaurants build moments, but the next business on our list? It builds structures that outlast the moment entirely. Number 7. Akin Construction LLC. In Washington, D.C., construction is less about who can build the fastest and more about who can survive the paperwork without losing their mind or their margins. That's where Akin Construction quietly separates itself from the pack. This is a firm pulling in $30 to $50 million a year, not by chasing splashy skyline projects, but by mastering the slow, grinding machinery of D.C. development. About 60% of their revenue comes from commercial projects, 25% from residential, and the remaining 15% from government set-asides, which are notoriously hard to access unless you know exactly how to move through compliance channels. Akin does. That knowledge alone is worth millions. Their $10 to $15 million annual backlog tells you something important. This company doesn't rely on constant pitching to survive. Work is already lined up. In construction, backlog is oxygen. Without it, firms suffocate during delays. With it, they can negotiate, plan, and invest in people instead of panicking over payroll. Profit margins of 12 to 18% might sound modest to outsiders, but in a city like D.C., where delays, inspections, and change orders are basically a second tax system, that's strong performance. Especially when you factor in that Akin leans heavily into LEED Gold and sustainable builds, which command an 8 to 12% premium in institutional contracts. Sustainability here isn't virtue signaling. It's a pricing strategy backed by federal and international demand. The company's resume includes subcontracting work on the National Museum of African American History and Culture and World Bank facilities. Those projects don't just pay well, they certify credibility. Once your firm is trusted inside buildings that represent power, your name circulates differently in procurement rooms. Akin employs 100-plus workers, with roughly 70% minority representation, which matters because construction skills compound across generations. This is wealth that teaches people how to build things that outlast trends. Owner equity is estimated north of $10 million, but the deeper value is institutional fluency. In D.C., knowing how to build is secondary. Knowing how to get permission is the real moat. But after the buildings rise and the scaffolding comes down, the bigger question emerges. Who actually gets to live there long term? That's where the next business comes in. Number 6. Lynch. Real estate partners. Pulling in $50 to $80 million annually with over $100 million in assets under management, Lynch has built one of DC's most strategically aligned Black-owned real estate firms. Not by flipping neighborhoods, but by freezing them in place just long enough for residents to breathe. The flagship example is Carver Terrace in Ward 8, 312 residential units, valued around $50 million, secured with a 99-year affordability extension. That number matters. 99 years isn't a policy cycle. It's a generational promise. In a city where gentrification often feels like gravity, this project interrupts the fall. Lynch, a former Goldman Sachs professional, quickly understood early that the real leverage wasn't in fighting policy, but in partnering with it. His firm aligns closely with D.C. Housing Authority, incentives and national capital like Amazon's $100 million Housing Equity Fund, which lowers financing costs and de-risks long-term affordability plays. That's how you make doing the right thing financially sustainable. His personal net worth is estimated at $25 million, but the firm's value is better measured in households stabilized, over 1,000 units across the portfolio. Unlike speculative development, these assets generate predictable returns through long-term contracts, tax incentives, and occupancy guarantees. One of the more under-discussed angles is equity participation. In select projects, residents aren't just renters. They gain limited equity exposure or long-term financial benefits. That flips affordable housing from a holding pattern into a wealth preservation mechanism. Expansion plans into Baltimore and Richmond are based on Lynch's vision about those cities as they share DC's early warning signs: rising prices, policy gaps, and communities on the brink of displacement. But still, stabilizing neighborhoods requires more than property. It requires capital that remembers who it was built for, and that's where we're headed next. But before we continue, we are now halfway through this list of the richest Black-owned businesses in D.C. And if these stories of industrial grit and billion-dollar ambition are inspiring you, consider dropping a super thanks. We are building Black status to be the ultimate archive of Black success, and your support helps us dig deeper, research harder, and tell the stories that mainstream media ignores. If you want to see more content about the architects of Black wealth, hit that super thanks button and help us grow. Let's continue with the video now. Number 5. Mechanics and Farmers Bank, D.C. Unlike many businesses, Mechanics and Farmers Bank doesn't rely on advertising urgency. It advertises continuity. And in Black wealth, continuity is everything. With $493 million in total assets, $421 million in deposits, and $20 to $30 million in annual revenue, this bank has done something rare: survived every financial mood swing of the last century. Quarterly profits sit around $800,000, not because of aggressive speculation, but because of disciplined lending rooted in community relationships. Their loan portfolio tells the story. About 45% goes to small businesses, 40% to mortgages, and the remainder to community and institutional lending. That mix isn't accidental. It keeps money circulating locally while building long-term household equity. After the U Street riots, when national banks pulled back, mechanics and farmers leaned in. Over $50 million in loans went toward rebuilding Black-owned businesses and restoring a corridor many institutions had written off. That decision shaped DC's economic geography for decades. The bank also gives customers access to 44,000 ATMs nationwide, quietly removing one of the biggest operational disadvantages small banks face. Add to that its financial literacy programs serving over 10,000 people annually, and you start to see the full ecosystem. access, education, and trust reinforcing one another. Next up, we're entering into an entirely different sphere altogether, where narrative power turns into measurable wealth. Number 4. Allen Media Group, D.C. Operations. Allen Media Group is the result of a very specific bet. That ownership beats fame every single time, and D.C. is where that bet compounds fastest. While the company generates an estimated $300 to $450 million in annual revenue nationally, its Washington, D.C. operations are less about production and more about positioning. This is where advertising dollars meet regulation, where broadcast licenses intersect with federal oversight, and where media companies either learn how the system works or get swallowed by it. Allen Media Group controls over 20 local broadcast stations, the Weather Channel, and multiple digital platforms, pulling in roughly $100 million annually from advertising alone. But here's the part people miss. Allen consistently charges 20 to 30% higher ad premiums for access to Black and multicultural audiences because he owns the distribution channels others rent from. In D.C., that leverage is magnified. Federal agencies, advocacy groups, and political campaigns all need reach, and Allen already has it. D.C. teams handle government-facing media relationships, political advertising compliance, and regulatory monitoring. This isn't glamorous work, but it's where risk gets managed. Allen's aggressive billion-dollar acquisition attempts, including bids for Paramount and other legacy networks, aren't stunts. They're pressure moves informed by a deep understanding of antitrust law, FCC oversight, and political optics. The company employs 2,000-plus people nationwide, with D.C. acting as a strategic nerve center rather than a content factory. Editorial framing, public affairs messaging, and advertiser negotiations all pass through a policy-aware filter here. What makes Allen Media Group particularly dangerous, in a good way, is its refusal to chase trends. No viral obsession, no platform dependency. Just boring, reliable cash flow tied to infrastructure and regulation. But if Allen controls the story, the next firm on this list decides where that story gets permanently carved into stone. Number 3. McKissack and McKissack. If you hang around Washington, D.C. long enough, you learn something quickly. The companies with real power aren't the ones constantly announcing themselves. They're the ones whose names keep popping up whenever something important gets built. McKissack and McKissack is one of those names. It's been around since 1905, which in D.C. terms means it's watched entire political cycles come and go, and somehow stayed indispensable through all of them. Today, the firm generates between $100 and $200 million in annual revenue, managing a project portfolio north of $500 million. About 300 people work under the McKissack umbrella, many of them specialists in federal program and construction management. That niche might sound dry on paper, but in D.C. it's where real leverage lives. Federal projects aren't forgiving. One missed compliance detail can stall an entire build, and McKissack's value comes from knowing how to keep things moving when the rulebook is thicker than the blueprint. Their fingerprints are all over some of the city's most symbolic spaces: the Smithsonian, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, and numerous federal facilities. These aren't quick design jobs. They're long-term stewardship roles that require trust, patience, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. That trust translates into staying power, and it's a big reason the McKissack family's wealth now sits comfortably around $50 million. One of the quieter advantages the firm has leaned into is building information modeling, or BIM. By fully integrating it into project planning, McKissack has been able to shave roughly 20% off delivery timelines, which in federal environments can be the difference between smooth sailing and a congressional headache. What's interesting is how deliberately unflashy all of this is. McKissack hasn't chased trends or tried to reinvent itself every 5 years. Federal contracting remains the backbone because it's predictable, durable, and built for the long game. In a city powered by institutions, that kind of consistency doesn't just pay. It compounds. But even the most disciplined builders still need someone to finance the dream. And D.C. has one Black-owned bank that's been doing exactly that for almost a century. Number 2. Industrial Bank. Industrial Bank was founded in 1934, right in the middle of the Great Depression, which is a bold time to start any bank, let alone a Black-owned one. That context explains why this institution operates with such a deep sense of memory. Industrial Bank doesn't just move money, it remembers what happens when capital disappears. Today, the bank holds about $751 million in assets and $650 million in deposits, bringing in $40 to $60 million in annual revenue. Its 1.2% return on assets quietly places it among the stronger performers in the community banking world. Those numbers tell you this isn't charity banking or symbolic inclusion. This is a disciplined financial institution that happens to be Black-owned and community-rooted. Industrial's role in D.C. history runs deep. After the 1968 riots, when many national banks pulled back from U Street and nearby neighborhoods, Industrial leaned in. Over the decades, it has financed tens of millions of dollars in Black-owned businesses, helping stabilize corridors that still define the city's Black commercial life today. That kind of loyalty doesn't come from marketing campaigns. It comes from showing up consistently. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Industrial proved that point again by distributing over $50 million in PPP loans, many of them to small Black businesses that didn't have the relationships or paperwork speed required by larger banks. For a lot of those owners, Industrial wasn't the fastest option. It was the only option. The bank operates a small number of physical branches across D.C. and Maryland, but its reach is broader than it looks. Through a 44,000 ATM network and steadily improving digital tools, Industrial has managed to stay relevant without chasing every fintech trend. Expansion into Maryland is already underway, following Black middle-class households as they move outward from the city. Industrial's real advantage is trust. In a financial system where Black communities have every reason to be skeptical, that trust functions like invisible capital, slow to build, incredibly hard to replace. Now, you must be thinking this is as wealthy as it gets in D.C., but wait till you hear about the business sitting at the #1 spot in our list. It outshines everything in this countdown, not only in terms of scale but also in the visibility and long-term influence. Number 1. Urban One, Incorporated. If wealth is power, then narrative is leverage, and no Black-owned enterprise in the D.C. ecosystem controls leverage like Urban One. By revenue, reach, and long-term influence, this bank sits in a class of its own. The company generates between $500 and $550 million annually, with $526 million reported in 2024 alone. That revenue mix tells its own story. Roughly $400 million from radio, $100 million plus from television and digital platforms, and another $25 million from live events and branded experiences. Nearly 70% of advertising dollars come from Fortune 500 companies, which matters because it signals trust, scale, and institutional relevance, not just cultural popularity. Urban One's footprint starts in the D.C. metro area, with its headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland, less than 10 minutes from Capitol Hill. From there, it operates over 70 radio stations nationwide, including dominant DMV outlets like WOL and WYCB, and owns TV One, one of the most influential Black cable networks in the country. Add Reach Media syndication, digital platforms serving 12 million monthly users, and strategic stakes in audio distribution, and you're looking at a fully integrated media machine. Ownership is the quiet flex. Kathy Hughes, who founded the company in 1979 with a $10,000 loan, retains family control alongside her son, CEO Alfred Liggins III, through 80% plus voting shares. That structure has protected Urban One from dilution, hostile takeovers, and mission drift, a rarity for a public company trading under NASDAQ, UONE. At its peak, the firm carried a $1.2 billion market capitalization, and it still maintains over $200 million in cash reserves. The influence runs deeper than balance sheets. Urban One reaches 25 million Black listeners daily, controls roughly a quarter of U.S. Black radio listenership, and has proven its ability to shape political engagement, cultural narratives, and voter mobilization. The company also functions as a talent engine, having launched over 100 Black executives into senior leadership roles across media and corporate America. Economically, the multiplier effect is enormous. Urban One redirects over $300 million annually into the Black advertising and creative ecosystem, supports 1,200 employees, 60% Black, and drives hundreds of thousands of indirect jobs through vendors and partners. With streaming expansion targeting $1 billion in revenue by 2028, the ceiling is still rising. And in D.C., that's as elite as it gets. So these were the 10 richest Black-owned businesses in Washington, D.C. Which one impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments, and for more such astonishing facts about Black wealth, take a look at the channel Black Status.